Hey, friends. My name is Craig Cullinane, and I want to welcome you to my first series on awakening. I am excited to explore this topic of awakening. I have been musing about how, gosh, we're on a planet right now, hurtling through space at vast speeds, and somehow we find ourselves in these bodies. Somehow we find ourselves having this experience of being in a human body on a planet hurtling through space. And it seems to me like so much of our lives, especially now in the modern world, we are deadened and we are supported almost in being distracted, being shut down, not being fully alive and awake in our experience. And so this series is an offering to welcome you, welcome everybody to think about and investigate and be curious about what it means to awaken. Awaken into our lives, awaken into consciousness, awaken into pleasure, awaken into what's important to us. So this first episode, the topic is awakening the sacred. Awakening the sacred. What does that mean? Sacred. So the word sacred can bring up a lot of thoughts and feelings for people, some really beautiful and some maybe not so beautiful, maybe challenging, or it could be a neutral word for you. For me, when I talk about the sacred, I mean what's most important to me? What do I value deeply? What am I aware of that I value deeply in my life? And how do I give that attention? How do I activate it, right? So there's a beautiful quote that I love by Stuart Wilde. It's, how do you make something sacred? You say, this is sacred, and then you treat it that way. Right? So this, I want to ask you to ask yourself, like, what's sacred in your life? So let's start there. What's sacred in your life? So for example, I wasn't brought up with a particular religious or spiritual practice or consciousness. So, in terms of spiritual sacredness or religious sacredness, that's not something that I have has meant a lot to me in my life. Although recently, differently, I definitely have a spiritual practice. And so, one thing that I notice is sacred for me is my morning spiritual practice. And by sacred, I mean I allow it to activate my spiritual energy, my love energy. And what's sacred about it is that I don't miss it. I do not miss it. I wake up every morning and I have time in connection and time to tap the love energy that's within my body and make it available to me in my consciousness, in my body, in my day. And it's sacred to me. I hear people talk about activating the field of sacredness. What we turn our attention on grows. Another thing that I've noticed is sacred to me, and again, I want you to think about what's sacred to you is, and it's funny, my family, again, we weren't religious. We didn't go to church. We didn't do anything like that. But in my entire life, I'm 52 years old. I have never one time ever been away from my parents or my mother on Christmas morning. And although it's not really a religious holiday, there's something that's sacred about it. Something deep in my soul calls me home to my mother and my father's now dead, but when my dad was alive, my parents and my family on that day. And I realized, wow, that's sacred to me. I would not miss that. It's too important. It has too much meaning for me. It it allows me to feed and nourish my connection with my mother and my parents and my family in a way that's useful. So I ask you, what's sacred to you? Is it a spiritual practice? Is it your family? Is it how you care for your body? Is it your friends or your relationships or your creativity or your work? What's sacred to you? Let's take a breath. And why be in this question of this awakening the sacred? Why can it be valuable to give attention to what is sacred? You know, human beings have lots of different needs, and we're wired in lots of different ways. And one of the needs, and I believe it's a need that we have as humans, is to have meaning in our lives. It can be very lonely and painful and difficult to live a life where nothing is meaningful to us. There's nothing that matters. There's nothing that's important. And we can feel the grief or pain of that if we don't have meaning. And I think awakening the sacred and being curious about what's sacred to me can awaken meaning in our lives that can activate one of the great deep pleasures of what it means to be a human being on planet Earth. And I think it distinguishes us from other people, other animals, other life forms on Earth. So as another way to kind of feel into awakening the sacred, now here's another question. What do I wish was sacred to me in my life, but is not? What do I wish I vested with meaning and importance and sacredness, but I just don't do it? And how does that feel? So for example, for me, I can struggle with food. I can struggle with how I care for my body in terms of nourishment. And sometimes food for me is a way to check out or distract myself or numb feelings or emotions. A lot of sugar, a lot of bad food. And I have a desire, I have a wish that my relationship with food was more sacred. I mean, food comes from the earth, people cultivate it. There's a lot goes in to what I put into my body. And for most of my life, I really haven't thought much about it. I've either taken it for granted or I've used it, like I said, to distract or stuff my feelings or my emotions. And so I wish that my relationship with food was more sacred than it is. And I'm taking steps. I'm trying to vest my relationship with food with more sacredness than it has been. And so how do I do that, right? I pause and I give thanks and gratitude for food that comes into my body. I try to think about what food is coming into my body. I spend time and attention on preparing food that's nourishing for me. And so in those ways, I try to vest it with sacredness. How do I make something sacred? I say, this is sacred, and then I treat it that way. So treating my relationship with food with more sacredness. What about you? What in your life do you wish was more sacred to you than it is? What do you notice about how you treat some aspect of your life that you wish you treated with more sacredness or importance or meaning than maybe you do? Maybe it's that you notice that creativity is really important to you. You have a desire to be creative in any variety of ways, painting, writing, music, dance. But you just don't give it the space and attention in your life that it wants. And of course, that's so human, right? We all do that. What do you wish was more sacred or that you vested with more meaning or attention or importance than maybe you do? Just think about that. Let's breathe into that. Maybe it's your friendships. Maybe it's your significant other and your time together. Maybe you've fallen into unconscious habits about how you relate with your loved ones, your family, your self-care. Maybe there's some deep desire you have. I want to write a book. I want to run a marathon. I want to plant a garden. And you just don't get around to it. And there's a pain, there's a loss, there's a longing, there's a grief that can come up when we notice we have a desire in ourselves that expresses itself, that speaks its desire, but we don't listen, or we don't give it the attention that it wants. So it's something, and this isn't something to beat up on yourself about. We all do it. We are humans. We all do it. But it could be interesting to think, how can I awaken my life? Bring meaning and aliveness to my life by actually choosing to give attention on some level to something in my life that is speaking to me, that wants attention, that wants to grow. I can get very all or nothing about things, so it's like I notice, for instance, that I have a desire to paint and express with visual arts. And, I get to this thing where I go, oh God, I need to do this like every day. I need to do it full out. And it becomes overwhelming. It becomes too much. And so what I decided to do is I want to give some space and time to visual arts and creative expression, right? So I found one class that I go to every single Wednesday afternoon, and I go there and I paint. And that's enough. And I feed it. I feed that desire, and it's so nourishing. It feels special. It feels like I've activated and awakened my creative energy. And it's enough. It is enough. It doesn't have to be more until it maybe wants to be. It's enough. I'm feeding that desire. What's something in your life that, with one small choice, you could give attention to something important to you? And then experience how that feels. Awakening into your life, awakening into your aliveness. Why not? I think the word pleasure has gotten a really bad rap in our culture. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of story about how it's not okay to feel good. It's not okay to have pleasure. It's a great tantric principle. Pleasure is healing. What would it be like to give yourself a little permission to experience pleasure? And one way to experience pleasure is to give attention and time to a desire you have. Give yourself that permission. Just take a breath. So thank you for joining me for this first session of On Awakening. And today we talk about awakening the sacred. What is sacred to me? How do I wake it up? How do I activate it in my life? And then how does that feel? How do I walk in the world if I'm giving attention to what is sacred to me? Who am I if I come from that place? My name is Craig Cullinane. I'm so happy to be with you. I hope this was valuable to you. I'm a coach. I'm someone who loves supporting and working with people to awaken the sacred, to awaken into our lives. If that's interesting to you, let me know. I'm going to be doing this every Wednesday. Next week, we're going to be talking more about something I touched on right here, awakening pleasure. What happens in my life if I awaken pleasure? Thank you, and have a beautiful day. Go love the world. Go extend the treasure of your love to the world, to a person, to a place where you are. And thank you, and see you soon.